Так, здається, тут його не чути. Hello, I'm Yulia from Vox Ukraine, and I'm welcoming you here. I'm very glad.
Good day, everyone. Good day, dear colleagues and friends. We are delighted to welcome you here at the event organized by Promote Ukraine and Vox Ukraine. And today, for the first time, we are going out of our regular scope of issues that we are normally dealing with. And this time we're expanding our scope to also, let's say, slightly medical field. So it's going to be on verge of politics and medicine. And we're going to talk today about vaccination and responsibility for it, or better say, liability. And first of all, I want to give the floor to our partners from Vox Ukraine, namely to Yulia Mincheva, to say a few welcoming remarks, after which I'll take back the floor and introduce the topic further. Yulia, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm actually very happy that this is our fifth or sixth discussion. We at Vox Ukraine, as a think tank, we strive to enhance the public debate in Ukraine in order to actually make better decisions in public policy. And the world longs for the day when coronavirus vaccines will actually let us return to normal life. And the most important question is how long actually before we get there, and who will be responsible for it, and who is responsible. I'm a huge fan of the Political podcast, and I was very impressed that the problem around all this vaccination, they're the same, and they're actually in common in Ukraine and in the rest of Europe. And I think we will have very fruitful discussion today on this issue. Thank you once again to Promote. It's very glad to have such a good partner who will always bring all the marvelous speakers together. So let's see who will be in charge of all the vaccination process right now. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Yulia. So just to, again, expand on what we aim to achieve today, let me say the following, that we now find ourselves at a stage where resolution to a pandemic seems to be within reach. Pharma industry is in vigorous competition to provide the most effective, easy to distribute, and affordable solutions. Governments all claim that return to normalcy hinges upon rates of vaccination and calls its citizens to show solidarity and not to be free riders to ensure the herd immunity is achieved in the fastest possible way. Yet, substantial numbers of citizens, even in developed countries, have vaccine hesitancy. Today, we are going to talk about one major factor that makes people doubtful, namely responsibility for vaccination. Vaccines are claimed to be effective, and this is one thing, but the other question is, how safe are they? European Medicines Agency has issued a conditional authorization for Pfizer, Moderna, and Astra Zeneca vaccines. However, the conclusive results of the third stage of clinical trials will be known only by 2023 at earliest. It's projected that by then, majority of the population worldwide will be vaccinated, and not only in developed countries, because the claim is to have solidarity and to leave nobody behind. And now let's pause for a minute and assume that, God forbid, at least one vaccine will cause severe side effects, like it did pandemics. For those who might not be familiar with this story, I will remind that the pandemics was initially authorized under exceptional circumstances, like COVID vaccines, due to the urgent need to address the threat of a swine flu. As a result, 1,500 people, including 800 children, in Europe alone developed narcolepsy, which is a sleep disorder, after receiving this swine flu vaccine. So vaccination should be a default option only if benefits outweigh the risks. But who is able to give such a guarantee about any of COVID vaccines? Or put differently, who is to bear a risk and liability should something go wrong in the future. So today we're going to debate whether it should be an individual responsibility to take a risk to be vaccinated, but then how governments can prevent actually a shrinking of civil liberties, and also that there is no discrimination against people who decide not to take vaccines. Should it be state responsibility? But then what are the mechanisms of remuneration, or kind of the, if damage is done, how will the governments compensate? Should the pharma industry bear this responsibility? But then again, we know that liability clauses are being kind of strike out of the purchasing contracts, or should this be medical agency that authorize the administration of vaccines? So, or should the responsibility be mixed? So these are the questions that we put to our speakers, and I'm delighted to present to you them one by one. We will start with kind of international, let's say, dimension, non-country specific, and then move closer to kind of Ukrainian case with a few presentations by Ukrainian speakers. But in order that I said, I'm delighted to present to you Ms. Tanya Porchik, co-founder and president of the Visio Institute, and she's located in Slovenia, to share her input. Tanya, floor is yours.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I will try to address these questions that were just explained by Marina, and that are not just questions that people in Ukraine are asking, not questions that are people here in the EU are asking, but the entire world. And these questions have been posed a year ago, not now, but already a year ago, and the decision makers had to tackle these questions, at least try to tackle them as best as possible in order to set the regulatory environment, and then also, of course, the legal structure if it was missing, in order to not hamper, not to, have these consequences that are not, from the past we have learned something. So hopefully our decision makers have now become wiser. And I will be speaking about this topic from the EU perspective mostly. I was asked to talk about a little bit about what the Commission has done and what the European Medicines Agency have done in order to prepare ourselves for this period that we are now going through, when vaccines have been authorized. And it was mentioned before, in the European Union, we currently have 3 vaccines that have received a positive assessment from the European Medicines Agency, and that means that they have been evaluated on safety, quality, and efficacy. For that reason, because they have received a positive assessment, they have received this conditional marketing authorization. I know this is a lot of words, but meaning that right now these pharmaceutical companies, these 3, Pfizer, Moderna, and Astra Zeneca, have a year when, of course, they still need to report, and they still need to continue with the trials. They need to monitor safety of vaccine that they have put out, and they have received this positive assessment from EMA. But at the same time, that means that after a year, they have to reapply again for this conditional marketing authorization. And then in 3 years, so basically if in 3 years, all these conditional marketing authorizations go through without major hitch, without major complications, without these vaccines revealing to have side effects that are more severe than we have expected, that they have expected, that this regulatory body has assessed from the data that was available to the regulatory body, then they will get a temporary, we can call it temporary marketing authorization. Now, when I do want to kind of move back a little bit. When I talk about, it doesn't matter if it's conditional marketing authorization or then the permanent in 3 years. What does that mean for the EU member states? It means that after our regulatory body, EMA, provides this authorization, it means that any EU member state may use that vaccine on its market. However, before these positive assessment have been given, it's important to know that EU countries had were able legally to use another mechanism, which is emergency use authorization, to give authorization for any other vaccine that hasn't received this positive feedback from EMA. So we have seen a couple of countries that have done that. And so in that case, liability is strictly with that EU member state, and also that vaccine cannot be put on, cannot be used in any other EU member state. However, if vaccine is given this conditional marketing authorization, liability rests solely with pharmaceutical companies. So to answer a question that was posed by Marina, so in our system, if EMA gives a green light, that means that for the next year until the next review is given, the pharmaceutical company bears the entire liability unless it pulls out, unless the company decides to pull out the vaccine from the market to prevent further problems to the people that are vaccinated. Now, it's important to know that in this case of EMA's assessment of the vaccine, what EMA is doing differently than what other regulatory bodies around the world are doing, it's rolling reviews. And this is something that it has turned out to be a very good step with EMA, and of course with the guidance of the Commission, which means that actually as soon as any data, any information on the vaccine, on the development of vaccine was available to the pharmaceutical companies, meaning before they even applied for the authorization from EMA, they were able to share that with EMA. So EMA was already kind of having heads up a few months in this case to review all this data that was coming to that the pharmaceutical company was gathering from own trials, from the expert community, as well as EMA was able to engage with own peer review process, with own different tasks. They have a task force to review this data. So basically, as a comparison, in the United States, they don't have this process of rolling reviews, meaning that their regulatory body waited until all the data was presented to the body to start reviewing. While in European Union, we were able to do that faster. For that reason, right now we have already 3 vaccines on the market. Now, going forward, I do want to mention one other issue, which is how do we go forward? Now we have vaccines, and human rights issues will not stop here, because we have also questioned whether there should be an international certification of vaccines, mandatory tool, to enter all private or public spaces. Now, this is a big debate. It's a big topic, especially in the EU, where some countries already, practice mandatory vaccinations for certain diseases, but then the others are completely on the other side of the spectrum where they would never do that. But, so now the question is whether they will be, whatever, COVID-19 will turn out to be with all the mutations that are still coming up, I don't think the virus has stopped mutating. If it becomes really serious, whether, governments will mandate international certificate of vaccination or any kind of certificate for all of us to be able to participate in public life. It's possible, however, may not happen. So then I just looked into, so we will not have only this kind of, probably many of you have it at home, or some stack from, your childhood. I have this one that is printed out, but then, right now there are many countries, also the World Health Organization, they are talking about electronic version of this little yellow book after we are vaccinated, whether who has access to the data that is in the electronic version of this certificate, whether we carry this around on our cell phones, where this data is stored. So then there are also questions about what the future will hold for all of us, whether we will have some kind of a RQ code to go, when we will want to enter a courtroom in order to be able to prove that we have been already vaccinated. Well, that I would say that is the kind of the end that we might face eventually. However, all governments will have to wait carefully on each step, whether their measures that are imposed, they are proportionate, whether they are legal, whether whatever they are putting in place is protecting public health more than it is actually restricting our liberties and freedoms that we already have, rights and liberties that we already have. And we are very protective of them. So that's all for me from now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing your thoughts and for explaining to us that here in the EU, these are primarily member states that are now kind of in charge after the final authorization of vaccination by EMA, when pharma industry will kind of take over and be totally liable. And the other big issue that you touched and that we probably want to address in one of our follow-up events is definitely, the vaccine certification or vaccine passports. So there is indeed the difference between vaccines being, for instance, mandatory and compulsory. And we know that in case of Italy, where this is mandatory, but like you don't want to be vaccinated, you just pay the fine, let's say 500 euros. And that's it. And this is how kind of you withdraw. But if this is compulsory, it means that your civil liberties, let's say, are limited. For instance, you don't have, as you said, access to the courtroom, or you don't have access to any, entertainment facilities or any other public or private spaces. And how to kind of draw this line, and should it be the same in all the Schengen area or in all the EU, or countries will take case-by-case decisions, remains to be seen. And again, we want to address this topic one of the next times. And now I revert to Ms. Rahel Ziebner, who is working for Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And she's actually the project manager who is responsible for Spain, Italy, and Portugal. And she has written an amazing article about vaccination in Italy. Why Italy? Because Italy was one of the countries strongest hit initially. So therefore it was put kind of on the front line, probably together also with Spain, and had to respond. So let's hear from Ms. Ziebner regarding how it is now evolving, and what is the public discourse regarding vaccination and liability, not only in Italy, but in all of the Southern Europe.
Yes, thank you very much, Marina. First of all, it's a pleasure that I was invited to be here today. Yes, as you already mentioned, Italy was one of the first countries to be hit by the coronavirus pandemic with devastating economic and social consequences, which we're all suffering now. And the long-awaited vaccine has finally been available in Italy since December. And ever since, also the debate about making the vaccine obligatory or not has been a big debate in Italy. And for example, if I think of Spain, where I am located right now, we're in the middle of the third wave. Spain has decided to have like a not public register who has been vaccinated and who not. The government says that this is under the full protection of people's data. I don't know to what extent we can make sure that this data is protected. And I can also say that here in Spain right now, after the vaccination rollout, a lot of relaxations are taking place on different local levels. And like, I'm a bit afraid that cases might rise again if we do not get the population really to be willing to do the vaccination by their own free will. And if we just look at Portugal, for example, we have a horrible situation there. You might have heard that in the media. There is a total lockdown going on right now. So all these three countries were heavily hit by the pandemic, and all three countries also have that discussion. Which groups to vaccinate first? Should it be obligatory? Should it not? How to proceed? How do we get enough vaccination, amounts of vaccinations? How can we make sure that the infrastructure to vaccinate in big quantity is available? For example, Spain has set very ambitious goals. The government actually said that they want to vaccinate 100% of the population here in Spain by the end of the year. And the question is, how can you do that with the current health system? And are there enough? Is there enough infrastructure to ensure these things? So we're in front of a huge challenge, and the basic to overcome this crisis, I think, is reason, self-responsibility, and democratic discourse. So if we talk about political action with regard to the vaccination, it must be clear that the parliaments must be involved, that a clear, transparent communication strategy is being implemented by the governments. And of course, also the trust into the governments is a crucial factor, which, for example, in Italy is something which has always been an issue, the trust into institutions and into the government. So I think it's important to use this as the key to encourage people to inform themselves about the vaccines and to build their own opinion. Because in the end, there is no 100% security. And also, I think it is an interplay of the different stakeholders. So of the pharma industry, of the governments who need to build trust into the vaccinations, and also of the citizens who need to take their self-responsibility in this crisis, inform themselves, and make their own decision on the vaccinations. So we, for example, as our foundation, we're very much touching upon the issue of self-responsibility and also freedom rights, because I that's my personal opinion, I think there is no other alternative than to heavily roll out the vaccines, because the effects on social life and on economic life are so severe. And if we just think about all the vulnerable groups which are directly affected, for example, elderly people or ill people or people in other ways affected, and if we're also thinking about the indirect consequences, for example, people who lose their jobs, and within that, vulnerable groups like women, for example, who need to stay at home, and besides their work, they also need to take care of the children, because men are not willing to do it in many cases. If we think of migrants who are deducted from integration possibilities, and so on, it's such a huge scope that I think it is a responsibility of all the stakeholders in a society to tackle this vaccination issue.
Thank you so much for introducing the fact that there are stakeholders and everyone has to contribute, everyone has to be in charge, and not only point fingers to one institution or the other. But what I've heard from you and what I've concluded from your presentation is that in Southern Europe, the challenges are particularly big because there is a mistrust between people and their governments, or rather say of people vis-a-vis their governments, towards their governments. Therefore, the people probably are not so inclined to follow the recommendations, and therefore responsibility lies with them to be self-informed, to be well-informed, and to take their own responsibility and risk for their state of health.
Well, it's also the government's responsibility to also ensure that this whole process of the vaccine rollout is connected to campaigns, to informing the public on which steps are taken. I think transparency is a key issue here.
Yeah, and this is where the battle, let's say, is. We move on to our next speaker, and I would want to actually give a credit ahead even of his speech, because not only he is the only male speaker on our panel today, but he is also representative of State Enterprise Medical Procurement of Ukraine, which is the state agency, and Mr. Arsen Zhmadilov is a general manager there. So today he is the only, let's say, official representative of authorities, because unfortunately other people in power that we turn to, be they politicians or be they civil servants, particularly in the EU, turned down our invitation to speak, which we deeply regret. But again, we are delighted to have Mr. Arsen Zhmadilov, who will talk to us from a Ukrainian perspective regarding vaccination and liability. Mr. Zhmadilov, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rashevich, and thank you very much for your invitation. We at the State Enterprise, the Medical Procurement of Ukraine, we cherish transparency as one of our fundamental principles that we build our operations on. I would like to shed some light on the procurement side of the story, which is the vaccines procurement, a very heated topic worldwide, probably. And the first point that I'd like to make is that there is certainly a need for closer cooperation between countries when we are talking about vaccines procurement, not just in terms of setting up some sort of coordination mechanisms, like we know, for example, COVAX like facility and COVAX humanitarian aid, where we know that there are numerous countries who join those initiatives, who then wait for the vaccines to come from those initiatives. We understand that every pretty much every single coordination mechanism usually takes some time for the participants to actually get the result. And we see it now, firsthand, that all the countries that are getting their vaccines at the moment, they are getting it through direct contracts with suppliers rather than from coordination mechanisms, because the coordination mechanisms, they usually take some time for like all the transaction costs and all the negotiations and agreements that need to be set like behind the mechanism. But what I would like to stress on is the need and the importance to exchange information between different countries on their programs in terms of contracting, on their programs in terms of the conditions and other important information about the contracts, even if we're talking about the case that usually the prices are confidential and the countries, the governments, they cannot disclose their prices with the suppliers. This could be some other terms, some other parts of the contracts that are of interest. For example, delivery terms. So what are the delivery terms in terms of the location, in terms of the timing? What are the liabilities if, for example, a supplier fails on his promise to deliver the goods at the right time, in the right place? Like, are there any liabilities? The thing is that to find this information from open source, it is so much difficult, and probably we in Ukraine, we not just follow the trend, but we actually, to some extent, we set the trend, because we in Ukraine, we have an open system that that has the rule that it is, like everything is transparent for everybody, and everybody can see like everything. The system of public procurement, where you have to publish whatever contract you sign for the public funds. Okay, so we as the state enterprise, the medical procurement of Ukraine, we had a contract with a supplier on Chinese vaccine CoronaVac that is produced by Sinovac, and it is online, so you can download it, you can have it translated into your language, and you can see whatever like the terms of your interest in that contract. Unfortunately, I cannot say that we have this advantage of checking this sort of publicly available online resources from other countries. And there is a merit of this sort of communication, because we in Ukraine, as you know, we are at war with Russia because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and the fact that we failed on procuring the sufficient number of vaccines on time, say by January 1st this year, was used heavily by pro-Russian forces in Ukraine, and actually by Russia, to put forward a very simple claim that actually the West and the big farm producers that are mostly situated in the West, they turned their back on Ukraine, and they're not interested in supporting Ukraine to get a vaccine. So the issue got politicized, unfortunately, and there was very little, if any, information that could be used, like real factual information, that it is like it is not that the will of the governments or farm producers, that they did not want to sell anything to Ukraine. They were ready to sell to Ukraine. They did sell vaccines to very many countries out of North America and out of the EU. And the thing is that since the information was scarce, it was not really much available. There was a fruitful ground for manipulations, and the issue unfortunately got politicized. Next, we all understand that the situation in this market will probably change sooner or later. So now we all understand that that demands that the demand exceeds the available supply, and so we all are in a rush, in a competition for a product. But as we all can see from what is declared by vaccines producers, is that even in this year only, the production capacity will actually overwhelm the global demand for vaccines, and it means that probably at some point of time the situation will, to some extent, normalize. Okay, but the fact that there is very little, if any, communication between the governments in terms of exchanging, views, exchanging ideas, there might be a lag between the real situation in the market, when we will have supply that will exceed demand, and actually the impact on the contracts that we are having with farm producers, so that we can indeed reflect whatever interests that governments have when they have their contracts with farm producers. Because from what I know, we are having a very good one. I mean, the contract that we have with Sinovac in terms of the liabilities that are put on the supplier side. Okay, so if they fail to procure the product on time, they will pay fine. Okay, they will be penalized. If they fail to prove that the efficacy of the vaccine exceeds 70%, we have the right not to accept the vaccine. But from what I heard, from what we know, it is not the case. Globally, usually farm producers, they make sure that the contract terms are more favorable to their side rather than to a buyer's side. Okay, so there is a merit of exchanging information, and I'm glad that we can raise this issue, and we'll be glad to join further whatever initiatives are there in this regard. Thank you very much.
Mr. Juvendilov, you will be the first speaker that I have to ask a follow-up question straight afterwards, because in your presentation, I mean, you tackled the question that you work with on a daily basis, namely the procurement. And yes, we've heard the word liability in your speech also a couple of times, but it was more related to the actually the terms on which the vaccination is delivered or kind of distributed, whether it's in time or not, and whether it's proved to be efficient or not. But what we are trying to address here is a question of safety. Let's say the vaccine at a certain point in time in the future, and here we're not talking like we're not pinpointing which one, but one of the vaccines that has been procured turns out to cause side effects. So who is going to be liable in this case? Who is going to pay the consequences to the citizens that will have side effects of a vaccine? Can you please explain this issue?
Yes, well, thank you very much for this question. It is an important one indeed. We have in Ukraine a system of pharmacovigilance. That is the system that makes sure that whatever side effects are there when a medicine that is registered in Ukraine is used, that all the cases are recorded. And if there is an issue with a product, that this issue can be at least, tracked and traced. And then it is the issue of the controlling bodies. We have in Ukraine the Drugs and Medicines Service of Ukraine. It is the body that is responsible for this sort of controlling, controlling activities. They will then be checking on what side the fault actually happened. So was it the breach of the temperature regime that a vaccine was brought and the temperature was not the right one? It was not, kept within the norm, or it was the vaccine itself, which was not of good quality, so it was bad from the first point. But the thing is that there is a check on this risk in Ukraine, which is laboratory control of every single vaccine that is brought to Ukraine. And it is yet another issue actually, and I hope that whatever vaccine we are having in Ukraine that is now imported to Ukraine actually undergoes such a check, because it then makes sure that the product is a good one. So when you exclude all these cases that something happened in between, so for example, when it was transported, when it was stored, when it was distributed, if still yet again you have a side effect, then if it is within the array of the side effects that were foreseen for such a vaccine, that is probably something that should be tolerated, and there should be some sort of informational campaign to explain that things may happen. But if it is something that falls beyond or behind this the normal, then of course it is a big question to actually the producer. But actually, before you ask this question to the producer, you have to make sure that whatever was at your side, you did it within the instructions. So you followed the instructions.
Thank you for your answer. And before we hear our last speaker for today, Pani Natalia Humaniuk, who is actually going to talk about sociology and is going to present to us the results of the recent opinion poll that they've conducted together with their partners, and explain how familiar or how well informed citizens of Ukraine are regarding some of the issues we're talking about. I would also want to address our audience. So we do not have much time remaining, but still, if you are burning hot to ask your question or participate in the discussion, please get ready, get prepared, because right after Natalia finishes, we'll have a possibility to give you a floor. If you are watching us on Facebook or on YouTube, you can post a comment, and my colleagues will try to pass on this question to me, but only those who are participating in a Zoom discussion will be able to ask their question orally. And now I present to you Pani Natalia Humaniuk, who is a co-founder at Public Interest Journalism Lab, who will provide us more information regarding the sociology in Ukraine.
Great to join this discussion, and I hope that it's also interesting not just for the Ukrainians, but might be the case just for your interest, because I think you've done a lot of you have seen numbers of the polls in different countries where we had almost half of the population not ready to get jabs to be vaccinated. The problem with that for us was the case to find out what are the reasons behind, what are the legit concerns. And because we speak so much about disinformation, about conspiracy theories, yet there are of course the legit concerns, and of course the legit concerns, answering them may move the situation. So it was in December we've done the national poll. It's somehow coherent to the further polls where we got quite an interesting examples. But probably to kick the discussion, I want to say that at least 86% of the Ukrainians considered COVID-19 as a real threat, and around that number of people had been vaccinated when they were kids. However, at that moment, just 40 of them were ready to get vaccinated. This figure grew up within the last months, but it was clear that, for instance, 43% were concerned that the vaccines were developed very fast, somehow the issue which had been raised during this discussion. Or for instance, 20% were really interested in the case of the certifications. And though a third of the Ukrainians were believing in different kind of conspiracy theories about the origin of COVID. Just 10% of them were afraid of the being microchipped, receiving the vaccine, which somehow was, so when we looked at that number of more than 40% not willing or concerned about the vaccination, somehow you could read it in more optimistic way, because the survey demonstrated that the attitude often is caused by the real issues about the side effects. And if we are answering the question of whose responsibility is the job, so of course it's a joint responsibility of the government, of the media, of the people who are working with this. So I probably would ask to bring a few slides. There are not too much. You want just show there are colleagues. Any of the slides will be working. And you also can read the full research on the top of the chat. If not, I maybe can just tell it myself. So, for instance, it was very interesting to learn for us that 50% of the Ukrainians were earlier. Apart from that, we also have done the content analysis of the Ukrainian social media. So within 1 week in December, we were looking at Telegram channels, YouTube, Facebook, Viber, everything with the notes, vaccines, and the COVID-19. It was still a bit earlier than the vaccination in Ukraine started today, or there was more knowledge about possibilities of arriving the Pfizer vaccines. And it was very clear that the whole debates in Ukraine, as Arsene earlier mentioned, were all around the Russian vaccine. So there were quite a lot of targeted campaign on promoting it, but also there was quite a lot of the popular messages on criticizing it, but not really the vaccines, but creating the very, very political debates. And at the same time, the national poll showed that half of the populations, according to the representation, was concerned about possible side effects. 39% were really interested in results of vaccination against COVID in other countries. 30% wanted to know how the vaccines were used somewhere else. 20% were interested in the manufacturing process of the vaccines. 27% wanted to know how the mechanism of the vaccines work. So as I mentioned already, even 20% were really, really eager to know how the certification works. And that was something which we really didn't have much in the government communication, but also in the media. I'm the journalist myself, so I kind of take credit for that. So we, for instance, also looked at what are the factors that can discourage from the undergoing vaccination. So for 46%, that was the negative experience of the acquaintance and relatives. And for 27%, that was, for instance, the warning from the doctors. So it was absolutely critical what the local doctors, family doctors in Ukraine would tell the people. But to be honest, I should say that even the doctors were sometimes lacking the information about what vaccine is safe, and it's very fast process. We also looked at what are the factors that can encourage people to vaccinate against the COVID. And with this, I probably answer the question, should it be compulsory or mandatory? I think unless we give the proper information to the people, it can be compulsory, but maybe sometimes it's good to explain. So again, that was more or less the similar figure that for 34%, the positive experience of the relatives or acquaintance were the key to be encouraged to get vaccinated. For 18, the free of charge vaccination. For almost 30%, the recommendation of the doctor. So these are the things we should really thinking. And just to finalize with the figures, I think there were quite too much of them. So the people were really, first of all, half of the population is concerned about the side effects. 43 of the fact that the vaccines were developed too much in hurry. 22%, they were concerned that the storage and the transportation requirements will not be met, which is absolutely like, that's something it's easy to tackle. It's not the conspiracy theory. You somehow may explain how these things worked. Of course, 16%, there was those who were concerned that it's a pharmaceutical corporation get people into people's pockets. So these things are there. There are people about the, I don't know, like the all kind of conspiracy theories with 5% belief, 10% belief. But that's something with this poll, what we are doing with that, we are trying to make the go in depth with that, to work with the media, to do the recommendation for the media, but as well, coming back to again to the topic of our discussion, I think like why it's also very important to understand that each of us has its own role. So, for instance, as media as well, we are not yet fully aware, because compared to the vaccines from the old disease, we can't fully back any of the vaccines. You know, we can't rely just on Lancet or the Science magazine. It's just happening too fast. But the coordinated, of course, the coordinated cooperation between scientists and journalists and government and different civil society leaders whom people trust can be very very important. And maybe finally, interesting data just to finish it. Yes, at that point, 30% of the Ukrainians were trusting more the US-made vaccine, 23% were trusting the vaccines made in the Belgium and the UK, and just 12% of the Ukrainians at that point were trusting the Russian-made vaccine, and even less Chinese. So I do think that the providing the necessary information, which really is answering key questions people have, could be really good tool before we decide what to make compulsory and what should be mandatory. And as again, you can like read more figures, and it's very, it can be interesting, I think, not just for Ukraine because we talked as well to the colleagues in different Eastern European countries, and they kind of mentioned the very similar trends. They didn't done their own research, but we can think that in some cases these are the things we want to know.
Thank you so very much, Natalka. And to our honorable audience, I know that probably there were too many figures for you, too many numbers, and we regret that we could not show you the slides in the meantime, but I've already posted the link where you can get all these statistics from the website. So please do follow the link if you are interested. And the one number that I would want to highlight and pinpoint is that 50%, so half of population of Ukraine, is actually worried about side effects. So this is actually the topic of the discussion for today, and definitely the success rollout of the vaccination campaign will really depend on how much information is there, how reliable is this information, and what are the channels of communication of this information. So whether a population can be actually persuaded or convinced and then, you know, have less hesitancy, or whether actually these questions remain unaddressed and therefore population keeps on actually kind of boycotting the vaccination process. Before I make the final conclusions, just a couple of more remarks. We have only 5 minutes left, but I hope you will bear with me if we prolong it by another 5 or 10 minutes. If there is anyone who has to go, I mean, you can just leave us quietly. And those who want to stay for a Q&A session, please do so. And I open the floor to the Q&A session with giving the floor to Maria Ionova, who is the People's Deputy of Ukraine. Ms. Ionova, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My question is very short. Thank you for all your information. And just probably to Mr. Jumadilov, we as members of the parliament are really very worried about that vaccine who has arrived today. The name is AstraZeneca, but as we see, it's Covishield. And I'd like to ask, first of all, we do not know the price of this vaccine. So, and the information about this vaccine has been appeared only a few days ago when Stepanov flight to India. And we really do not know the quality of this vaccine as the negotiations and all the topics. It was about Pfizer, about Moderna, and about Chinese vaccine. So the communication campaign, I mean, the information, I'm not talking even like a member of the parliament. I talk as a citizen of Ukraine, which absolutely didn't have any information, you know, and it's different. The prime minister is one direction, the minister of health another direction, the president just announced. So where could we get an exact information, your recommendations, and also the quality of this vaccine which has been arrived?
Thank you, Ms. Ionova, for your question. And I will inform that we were not, as the State Enterprise Medical Procurement of Ukraine, we were not the party for the contract which actually was used to buy the vaccine that you mentioned. But there are some news, and probably we can say good news, at least some that needs that needs checking, is that it was registered yesterday. It was registered for emergency use. There was a positive conclusion that was provided by the State Expert Center to the Ministry of Health. And it was the ministry's yesterday's decision to actually register the vaccine. So I think that probably these two institutions, at least the Ministry of Health and the State Expert Center, are the sources of information to make sure that all the Ukrainians know that the vaccine is safe indeed, and it is of good quality indeed. And it is then it is really important, and you, in terms of you're not just a regular citizen, you are a member of a parliament, in terms of a parliamentary control, to make sure that all the issues with the storage and the distribution, that they are dealt, you know, professionally. I hope that it will, you know, these issues will be dealt professionally, and the vaccine will be delivered to the places where it will be then administered to the shoulders of the Ukrainians. But there is indeed, and I do agree with you, there is indeed a need for information that should probably come primarily from the Ministry of Health.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. If there is anybody who wants to ask another question, please flag it. I mean, raise your hand or just let us know. Otherwise, I'm moving to the question that was posted in the comments, and that reads as following: who will be communicating to the public the scientific methodology applied to verifying the safety of the vaccine? So who is going to explain and who is going to actually communicate the scientific data? And I propose that we use this question as kind of also wrap up. So I would want to go in the order that speakers presented. You may kind of address this question, but also make some few concluding statements or comments to the issue, to the things that you've heard by other speakers. So Tanya, please, if you could address this question or just make general conclusions, we would be thankful.
Thank you. So for someone living in a EU country, EU member state, I can think of three bodies that we would look for such evidence. First is World Health Organization. Second is EMA, as mentioned before, European Medicines Agency. And the third is a national regulatory body. It can be sometimes, you guys mentioned ministry, but it can be also an independent institution that that has these responsibilities for a particular country.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Rahel?
Yes, let me, could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So in essence, the question was, who will communicate the scientific data? So who will actually be presenting the scientific methodology and explaining all the science behind the vaccines to the vaccination?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, here again, it's different stakeholders who should be involved in that, and I'm not only thinking of the national level, but also on the local level, for example. If I found that very interesting what was mentioned for the study before, the data which showed the concerns of people that the vaccination is not safe, that it was not tested enough, and so on. And it's basically the same concerns we hear here in Spain or you hear in Italy. And I think it really goes along with the question of trust. So who do you trust? Who is delivering the information and who is delivering quality information, so to say. And I think also apart from official bodies whose responsibility it is to inform the public, I think we should also think in the broader sense to involve the local levels, because many times people trust the local level more, even more than other levels. And same also applies to, for example, the healthcare sector itself. So also the people, the employees in the healthcare sector, they should also be educated well in the processes and in the information available, so that they also can easily access it and spread the word, so to say. Apart from the official bodies involved into spreading the information, and apart from media campaigns and so on, to give information, transparent information to the public.
Thank you. We've received a couple more questions, and unfortunately, I have to apologize. We will not be able to address them since two of our speakers have already left. I mean, they apologized and said that they had other engagements. Yet, with Natalia, I want to discuss one other question that popped up in our comments. It had to do actually with development of biotechnology sector in Ukraine, but the first part of it was related to the social media as the source of information. And probably you are best placed kind of to talk about that. I mean, you presented in your study that most of the Ukrainians still get their information from TV, and then at a certain stage also comes kind of social media. So do you think, I mean, what role of the social media in spreading the information, in checking that the information is verified and is not misleading, and that disinformation is stopped from being spread? How do you see it as a journalist?
I probably would say, I think it's very important for us really to understand that still on the question where people get the information on COVID, almost 60% of them said that the television, and just half of them believed in those news, and around 30% received it from social media and internet. Social media well less. However, why we should be cautious, because a lot of people have the high level of trust to their relatives and friends, and this is often not understood, that this is often they get this information also from the social media. So all kind of the social media listening tools, which I understand now the organization like UNICEF and others are working to understand what are the rumors popping up in the social media, they are important. However, I think that the most important is still to provide the very clear data. And I probably want to wrap up with the initial question you asked as our wrap up. As the journalist and an editor, now we were really engaged in the whole COVID vaccines survey, but I should say that it's still extremely difficult to get the data. I'm not at all complaining about like WHO or something. It's just very fast. So for instance, today we received in Ukraine the first jabs on the company. We didn't know. There is no way that there is a whole normal usual procedure that we know this facility in India, that we get the command from the WHO or explain the certification within such a short period of time. So I do think that of course the coordination is very critical. And something to mention, all the most important news I get was still from the Science and from the Lancet, from the scientific, for myself as a Ukrainian journalist. That was, honestly saying, the only source I could really either trust or comprehend what they are writing. All the rest, it's very, very difficult. But for instance, in our problem, and that's something we discussed in the region with my colleagues from Eastern Europe, we do not have at all the class of the health journalist or the journalist who covers science. Therefore, we know how to report on politics, how to explain what is the fault of the prime minister, what kind of, like what is happening with the corruption on things like that. But that is why our discussion in the media in Ukraine, but I think in the region, is heavily politicized, because it's covered by the people who for many years were covered politics and, or corruption or things like that. So therefore, I think we really need to change a bit of the mindset and to deliver something people need to know, and also get this knowledge, get this training on how to report healthcare crisis, not as a political crisis.
Thank you so very much. To briefly wrap up, today we've heard that in the European Union, because now the healthcare systems become not only national responsibility, but kind of gradually become more and more EU responsibility, there is kind of a common effort in actually kind of providing a solution. Ukraine is still a bit on the sidelines of kind of this process and this club, and has to develop its own mechanisms. And we were assured by a representative of one of the of the state procurement agency that there are mechanisms that actually that are put in place and that can ensure that producers, manufacturers, or whoever is guilty for any kind of wrongdoing in vaccination process will be held liable. But the question that popped up today and was new was actually kind of, whom do people trust? And it turned out that scientists are actually kind of the group that are trusted. So the question becomes of how people can get the scientific results, proofs to their kind of homes, through TV or through social media or through any other channels. So the picture is mixed, and everyone has a fair share in bearing their responsibility. But eventually, for the people to kind of to trust more, journalists, as I understand, will keep on, will have to delve into scientific fields more and more to actually explain to people what is really happening, what's the science behind the vaccines, and what are the possible outcomes. So I thank you everyone who stayed up until the end. I see that there are a few more people who raised their hands and who now want to post their questions. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. We also promised that everyone who registered will receive the materials, so namely the sociological study mentioned by Natalia Humaniuk, but also article by Rachel Zibner, and probably some other materials. Also, please feel free to write to us as organizers, and we'll forward the questions. I again apologize for not being able to accommodate everyone, and I thank everyone for their patience and for participation. Have a good day, and until next time. Bye.
Дуже дякую.